Hello. Just want to make some quick remarks about this week's readings, which you really have to work out for yourself. I mean, they're not easy arguments. At least the one from Nagel is not easy, just because it's longer and more complex. I think uh, the brief excerpt from Epicurus is fairly straightforward. But the advice I'd like to give you for this week's assignment is to remember that I really want you to concentrate on the arguments themselves. That is to really get down what is there, and in your assessments to critique what is there. Obviously, in your assessment of the soundness of these two really opposing and incompatible arguments, you're going to bring in your own ideas. But in a brief assignment, you really need to make sure that you concentrate on the arguments as they appear. Of course, this is not a class on the philosophy and death. If it were, we would go into things in a broader way, but it's a class in critical reasoning, and I want to give you in these excerpts where we go into different philosophers. So far, we've looked at Socrates, and we've gone into other philosophical arguments in the topical weeks. But we're going into a very famous argument by Epicurus, and then an almost equally famous at this point criticism of Epicurus's argument. So again, to see what's actually there and to concentrate on what's there is really what it's all about. There's certain premises, certain implications, which are derived from those premises. So let's look at briefly again at Epicurus's actual argument here, where he says that really the conclusion of his argument is that death is nothing to us, neither good nor bad. And what is the basis of that conclusion? That is, what is the premise from which he starts? That death is the privation of all awareness. That is the taking away of all consciousness, the absence of all awareness. And what seems to be the hidden premise there is that for something to be good or bad for us, we have to be aware of it. As he says, for good and evil imply awareness. I guess it's not a hidden premise, it's right there. And death is the privation of all awareness. So something of which we are not aware, and there's something a little tricky because death is both the privation of all awareness and so something of which we will not be aware. That is, we will not be aware of being dead. When death occurs, that is the announcement that consciousness, awareness, perception, experience of any sort is now at an end. And this is very well put, I think, by Epicurus when he says, death, oh, the most awful of evils. And that's ironic, right? That death is the most awful of evils, because, of course, he's saying it's not an evil at all. Death, therefore, the most awful of evils, is nothing to us, seeing that when we are, that is, when we exist, when we are alive, that means death has not come. And when death has come, we are not. That is, there's no moment where we actually experience death. Death does not bring with it anything of any value, good or bad, to us. So death literally is nothing to us. It's not something that we will ever be faced with, in a sense, because when it happens, we will no longer exist. So it should be nothing to us, he says. Now, there are a lot of puzzles that go along with that, but just getting the argument, you should kind of reconstruct the argument for yourself from these few remarks. It's definitely all there, but it might not be put in the most straightforward way. Now, the excerpt from Thomas Nagel's Death, which is his essay, never actually mentions Epicurus, but it's clearly a criticism of the idea that death can't be considered a bad thing for the one who dies. And that's definitely what Epicurus is getting at. Epicurus is not saying that we shouldn't feel bad when somebody else dies. and that their death could be a bad thing for us because we miss them, we love them, we are deprived of their company. Both of them are really talking about death from the first person point of view. From the point of view of the person who dies, Epicurus seems to be implying that it just can't be a bad thing for that person because logically it doesn't make sense. Nagel wants to say, indeed, that death is a bad thing for the person who dies. And if we see here, one of the things that he's arguing against, that the notion that what you don't know can't hurt you. Of course, if Epicurus is right and death is nothingness, then we don't know that we're dead. We don't know that we have died. And so we can't be hurt by death in that respect. Nagel thinks that that's nonsense, that there's all sorts of things that can be considered a bad for someone that they may not be aware of. And he talks about betrayals that we never become aware of, but he says there's still bad things for us and stuff like that. And basically what he's saying is that Epicurus, I think what he's saying is that Epicurus, you'll have to read through this very carefully, but generally he seems to be saying that Epicurus is wrong, that we have to experience something in the sense of suffer because of it, have bad or negative experiences of some sort because of it in order for it to be considered a bad. And he has a very interesting example that you might want to really pay attention to, and that is this hypothetical situation of the man who suffered a traumatic brain injury. This is I don't know if you can see it. This might be really too small to see. But he says, suppose an intelligent person receives a brain injury that reduces him to the mental condition of a contented infant, and that such desires as remain to him are satisfied by a custodian, so he is free from care. That is, imagine a fully grown man who suffers a traumatic brain injury, doesn't feel pain because of it, but is let's say, instantaneously reduced to someone with the mental state, or as he says, the mental condition of a contented infant. So he's still happy. He's just happy as an infant. He's not happy as an adult with all the faculties of an adult. Now, if we think about that, Nagel says, well, the person has been deprived of something, but they don't mind being deprived. Just as death deprives us of all the goods of life, but if Epicurus is right and death is just the becoming nothing of the person, the total annihilation of the person, that it becomes problematic to say that something bad has happened to us when we die because we don't suffer because of the event of death. Well, this man who's been reduced to the mental state of a contented infant doesn't suffer as a result of his deprivation, doesn't feel pain or is not aware of the deprivation because they're in the mental condition of an infant. But no one, he says, would agree that something bad had not happened to him. That is, everyone would agree that something tragically bad had happened to him. If someone is deprived of goods, then even if they're not aware of the deprivation and they don't suffer any negative psychological or physical condition because of the deprivation, that does not necessarily mean that something bad hasn't happened to them because of the deprivation. It's a really interesting counterexample to what seems to underlie Epicurus's idea, which is that death can't be bad for us, basically because we never experience it. So you really will have to, I just want to, really want to pay attention to these arguments in detail. You really want to pay attention to what the basic argument of Epicurus is, leading to the notion that death is nothing to us, and so death can't be a bad thing. And how does Nagel attack that argument in trying to refute that idea and say, well, despite what Epicurus says, death in the form of a deprivation that we're not aware of is, in fact, a bad thing for us?